This is NHTV2, North Haven Government Television, a service of North Haven Community Television. The following program is brought to you through the support of the Town of North Haven.
Good evening, Jeffrey. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Hi, how are you?
Well, thank you. As you're aware, we've forwarded to you questions that were submitted by our Commissioner Cardwell, asking specific legal interpretation of those items.
Sure.
So if you'd be kind enough to go ahead and do that, we'd appreciate it.
Sure. The first question is the use of executive session. Clarify the legal use of executive session. When can executive session be used? What can we discuss or not discuss? Executive sessions are governed by the Connecticut Freedom of Information Act. And an executive session, of course, means a meeting of the commission plus any guests, non-commission members that are invited in the motion by the commission to enter into executive session, where the public is excluded. And the purposes for the executive session have to be one of the purposes set forth in the Freedom of Information Act. And those purposes are as follows. First, discussion concerning the appointment, employment, performance, evaluation, health, or dismissal of a public officer or employee, provided that such individual may require the discussion be held in an open meeting. Second, strategy and negotiations regarding pending claims or pending litigation to which your agency is a party. Third, matters concerning security strategy or the deployment of security personnel or devices affecting public security. Fourth, discussion of the selection of a site or the lease, sale, or purchase of real estate by the town when publicity regarding that site or that purchase or that lease or construction would adversely impact the price of whatever the town is doing. And then lastly, there's somewhat of a catch-all, which is the discussion of any matter which would result in disclosure of public records or information contained in those records described in subsection B of section 1-210 of the Connecticut General Statutes. 1-210B of the Connecticut General Statutes is the section of the Freedom of Information Act that sets forth exemptions. And there's a long list of exemptions to the act, and by incorporating those into the definition of executive session, the legislature allows for the possibility that an executive session may be necessary in order to protect information that's otherwise exempted under FOIA. So that's the use of the executive session. In order to enter into an executive session, there has to be a motion. The purpose of the executive session has to be one of those 5 purposes that I just articulated. The names of any members of the public or other town officials, attorneys, anybody other than the members of the commission that are being invited should be included in the motion. And following a second and any discussion, you can only go into executive session upon a 2/3 vote. Okay, so it's not a simple majority, it's a 2/3 vote that's required to go into executive session. In terms of what can be discussed, you can only talk about in executive session whatever the subject matter is that's the purpose of the executive session. So if you're in executive session and you decide you want to talk about something else, well, you got to come out of executive session. And if there's another proper purpose to enter into executive session, make a new motion, okay? If it's an item that's on the agenda as a public matter and it's not a proper matter for executive session, you don't talk about it in executive session. There's no votes to be taken in executive session. when you want to come out of executive session. And more often than not, even when I've served on building committees, when I was on the Board of Ed in Trumbull, Town Council in Trumbull, many times, there'd be a motion to come out of executive session. That's not necessary. It's harmless, but it's not necessary. You can just adjourn the executive session and either resume your public session or adjourn your public session, which has to take place in public because there's no votes in executive session. So does that answer your questions about executive session?
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted to know.
Okay.
Good.
Second, what is the role of the Fire Commission? The Fire Commission's role is defined by the charter and by the Connecticut General Statutes. The charter, of course, very specifically provides that the Board of Fire Commissioners shall have the powers, duties, and responsibilities and be subject to the restrictions and limitations specified in the Connecticut General Statutes with respect to boards of fire commissioners, or as may be deemed appropriate to such boards. If you look at the Connecticut General Statutes, the statute 7-301 basically says that a town can establish a fire department and establish either through the Board of Selectmen or the Town Council or through a Board of Fire Commissioners, management and control of the fire department. So the role of the North Haven Board of Fire Commissioners is the general management and supervision of the fire department using the resources that have been appropriated by the town. So as with all boards of and commissions that have line items in the town's appropriated budget, you can only expend the funds that have been appropriated to the fire department. You're not the Board of Finance. You can't appropriate funds. You can't ask the town meeting for an appropriation. You can't borrow money. You can't bond. So if you need additional funds for a capital expenditure, if you need additional funds for an operating expenditure, you go through the process set forth in the town charter, which means you go to the Board of Finance to request any additional appropriation. But it's, general management and supervision. I know that's vague, but, quite frankly, police departments, fire departments, the language in the statute and in most town charters is vague because every community is different. And, it's really left to each individual Board of Fire Commissioners. You still have a lot of towns that have large volunteer fire departments or complete volunteer fire departments. So the statute really leaves it up to home rule and how the local Board of Fire Commission goes about its business is a matter that's, for the most part, left alone by the state and varies from town to town. In terms of what documents can be shared with the commissioners, well, I mean, the general management of the fire department means that, and this was the same way, with boards of education, you don't get involved with the day-to-day operations of the department. You don't micromanage the paid professionals because the members of the Board of Fire Commission are lay people, right? You're not being paid to provide professional management services by the town. So the expectation is you're not there every day. You don't know what goes on every day. So the expectation is that if you need documents to vote on an agenda item or to prepare yourself for a meeting, that, you request that information. If there's, financial information, because the question references copies of the budget, if there's specific financial information that you need, that really ought to come from the finance department. The finance department serves the administrative role of tracking expenditures and spending against line items in the budget. What are the actions that we should be voting on? I mean, the practice, as long as I can remember, at least in North Haven, has been that the items that are voted on are there's a limited number, right? I mean, a lot of what you do is you receive reports, you receive updates from the chief regarding various endeavors. You receive information about personnel issues, whether it's workers' comp, sick, injured, firefighters, employees. You get updates on the status of fire apparatus, the status of recruits. You get updates on alarms. You get updates on EMS protocols, and you get updates on the budget. You get updates from the fire marshal's office. So, there may be specific items that you need to take action on an ongoing basis, but a lot of, I think, what the Fire Commission does is monitor and supervise and make sure that if there's needs that aren't being addressed, that you, as the Board of Fire Commission, commissioners, you're the eyes and ears for the town. So if there's something going on that you feel needs to be addressed, you put it on your agenda, you have a discussion. If it evolves into an action item, so be it. Are there any follow-up questions based on my answers for that item?
Well, I guess the budget is the specific thing that I've been sort of asking about, because most other board member or commission and board members that I've talked to receive copies of the budget, not to micromanage, but to see the budget, because it's sort of part of oversight and questions that you might want to ask, because it's difficult to say that the town might need additional, you might want to request additional resources or ask questions when you don't actually have the information. So I know that the police commission, I've spoke with several of the police commissioners, and they get copies of the budget each month when they meet. So what's the process? I did speak with the chairman of the Board of Finance, and he said he would forward the copies, but there's a little bit of probably a lag behind that. So is the best process to go through Ed Swinkowski to get copies of the budget, so that if I have questions, I can ask those questions? Because that is, what your budget looks like and where you're spending your money has to do with, there was a Board of Finance meeting I was watching where you were talking about policy, and that the purview of policy for the fire department the policy of the fire department is under the purview of the fire commission. So I just still feel like, as a fire commissioner, it's not wanting to see the budget has to do with doing that oversight function. And so I'm trying to figure out how to be able to get that information, just so that if there are things in there that that you might want to ask questions about or inquire about, you have the information to do that.
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, it's not a legal issue, it's an administrative issue. My sense would be that I haven't had any conversations with anybody about this until now, but my recommendation, my sense would be that the finance department would be the direct route to get the fire department related budget items addressed that you're looking at. If you're looking for monthly reports, I would think that's where they're generated from, because obviously the Board of Finance gets them from there. So to me, that would make the most sense. But again, it's not a legal question. It's just a process and procedure question. And my sense would be the finance department would be the best place to get that information from.
Okay, thank you.
The third question was clarification on the procedure for correspondence. There's no provision under the Freedom of Information Act or any other law that deals with how a public agency processes and handles correspondence. I can tell you what the typical procedure is. The typical procedure is if there is correspondence that's addressed to an individual commissioner or to the Board of Fire Commissioners as a whole, then the secretary of the board receives and essentially has a file with that correspondence in it. And at each of your regular meetings, there would be an agenda item for the board secretary to give a summary of the correspondence that's received since the last meeting. For example, if the board secretary received 9 pieces of correspondence, letters and emails since the last meeting, the board secretary would simply say, I received, just giving you an example here, 3 letters from residents who had questions about water pressure for fire hydrants, 2 letters from residents that were concerned about the condition of some of our fire trucks, and 4 letters from residents commending us on the job we did with the fire on Middletown Avenue. You wouldn't read each individual letter into the so-called record. The secretary would just provide an overview. If somebody from the public sent the letter and said, I want this read into the record, I mean, we typically would tell people, look, if you want to make a statement, your correspondence is received and acknowledged as such. But if you want us to read it, you should come to the meeting, or in this case, dial into the meeting and, during public comment, say what you want to say. Because if we get into the practice of reading correspondence, then theoretically it could take up an enormous amount of time in your meeting, given, how many pieces of correspondence you could get. And that's the way in the other towns that I represent, and other boards and commissions that I represent, that's the way they do it. When I was on the Board of Ed in Trumbull for 6 years, we got a lot of correspondence, depending upon what time of year it was, especially during budget season. It wouldn't be unusual for us to get 50 pieces of correspondence, and the board secretary would just say, I got 10 letters in favor of adding a paraprofessional at the high school. I got 5 letters saying add more money for sports, that kind of thing. So I think it's important for the commissioners to know generally what the tenor of the correspondence is, but typically you wouldn't read each item of correspondence. Okay. Clarification on the legal obligation for meeting minutes, as well as what is standard procedure. The requirement that there be minutes of meetings for public agencies is set forth in the Freedom of Information Act. And the Freedom of Information Act requires that there be a record of all votes taken. So certainly with regard to action items, the motion that was made, who made the motion, who seconded the motion, and the vote should be pretty much verbatim. In terms of the rest of the minutes, there's no requirement. The minutes are not a transcript, okay? And I've seen all types you can imagine in 30 plus years of doing this stuff. I've seen all different versions of minutes. I've seen the minutes that are way too short and, are basically the meeting was called to order at 6 o'clock. There was nothing in there but 3 motions and what the votes were. And then the meeting was adjourned at 8 o'clock. And that during that 2-hour period, something else was going on, but you can't tell by looking at the minutes. Then there's the other version. I've seen 15 to 20 pages of minutes, and, God bless the person that makes those minutes, the board secretary, for trying to really convey everything that happened. But it's inevitable that even people that record it and then go back and listen to the recording, it's not a transcript. They're not going to make it a transcript. And so then someone gets upset that something was left out. The typical best practice, the typical procedure is to A, of course, comply with the law by having the minutes 100% accurately reflect the motion, who made the motion, what the motion was, who seconded the motion, and what the vote was. And in addition, summarize the non-action items. So for example, if you have on your agenda tonight, Jeffrey D'Onofrio discussing various questions, you wouldn't need to put the questions and everything I said. You would just say, you know, there was a discussion regarding the proper use of executive session, the role of the fire commission, clarification on procedure for correspondence, clarification on meeting minutes, etc. So instead of trying to capture everything that was said, you would give the reader of the minutes a conceptual idea of what was talked about at the meeting. Again, these are not action items, these are discussion items. So there's no obligation legally to, you know, to recite in the minutes what was discussed, but the best practice is to do so because, you know, you're doing the people's business, you're a public agency. If somebody wanted to have an idea of when something was discussed, you know, let's say in a future meeting it comes up, it's a nice reference to be able to go back and say, all right, at the March 23rd meeting, that's when D'Onofrio talked to us about this stuff. And if it's not in the minutes, you really wouldn't have any record to show that I was ever here. So that's the general practice with regard to meeting minutes. Clarification on documents that should be available to members of the public and commissioners through FOI. Any document that is in the town's possession, and when I say the town, that includes all the town employees, okay? We start with the proposition that it's a public record. But when I talked about executive sessions, I mentioned 1-210B. 1-210B, the Connecticut General Statutes, is the section of FOIA, of the Freedom of Information Act, that sets forth exempt records. And there's probably about 30 or so different categories plus subcategories of exempt records. Under FOIA, the public agency, which is the town or any agency of the town, which would include the fire department and the Board of Fire Commissioners, has 4 business days from when a request for public records is received to deny the request. Many times I hear people, including many lawyers, say, I didn't get my response within 4 days. That's not the law. The law isn't that we have to respond within 4 days. The law is that if we're going to deny the request, we have to notify you within 4 business days. And quite frankly, the Freedom of Information Commission and the Connecticut courts have repeatedly ruled that if we don't respond within 4 days, it's deemed a denial. The town's process, the town's procedure has been and is for a very long time that when the FOI request is received, it acknowledges receipt of the request and lets the requester know that it's working on it. If it's something where the town is concerned about whether or not there are exempt records, then typically Bill Ryan or I will be contacted by the town, and usually the finance department, Ellen Dufour, usually is the gatekeeper for the FOI request. She'll let us know. You know, for example, we got a request in last week for some documents by a commercial entity, by a business seeking some records about another business. So the concern was that, you know, are there records here such as personal property tax declarations that are exempt by law? And, you know, how do we respond to that? You know, are there records that are commercial or financial information that are given in confidence that, you know, in connection with a bid, like sometimes we require financial statements from a bidder to show us that they're financially responsible. So items like that, you know, we're very careful not to simply just provide those public records. But generally speaking, you know, the same public records that are available to you are available to the general public. That said, if there's documents that you review in executive session, keep in mind, everything in executive session is confidential. We take it to our graves. So that's, we exclude the public. And the problem when there's disclosures, and I've had this conversation a lot, especially, it's interesting when you sit on both sides of it. I've sat on building committees. And like I said, I sat on the Board of Ed and the Town Council when I moved to Trumbull. And people say, well, what's the big deal? I was in the executive session. I was just telling somebody from another board that we talked about this financial issue in executive session. And the big deal is that in addition to the fact that it's the law that it's confidential, think about what the executive session is. We excluded the public. Now I, as a member of the public agency who was in the executive session, unilaterally decide which members of the public I'm going to divulge information to. That's why it's problematic. We exclude the public. That means all of the public. And once we divulge information that we got in executive session to another member of the public, then we've done a disservice to all the other members of the public who weren't in executive session and weren't privy to that discussion. Likewise, with respect to documents, if you're in executive session and you're receiving documents that are germane to an item that you're talking about in executive session, those documents are confidential. They don't become public records just because the executive session ends. So, we're pretty careful with the way we handle documents because there's certain things that we do, that you may not be privy to. For example, we may settle a case and we may say that certain documents are confidential and subject to disclosure upon order of the court. Or if we receive a freedom of information request, we notify the entity that provided the documents to us so that they can assert any confidentiality and kind of force us to go through the FOIC process. So, records, FOIA basically governs two things, meetings and records. So just as we're careful about how we post agendas for meetings and handle, proper notice of meetings and proper voting and minutes from meetings, we're careful about the way that we handle documents. The ability of the public, the last question is the ability of the public to participate in meetings now that they are held on Zoom due to COVID. The public, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I think that question has actually been solved because we're starting to have public comment this meeting. So that was a question when I did these questions, it was a little while ago. So at that point we hadn't arranged for this. So I think at this point we have started the public comment process. So you can explain it if you want to, but I don't want you to feel like you have to because I think we've sort of solved that issue.
The one thing to be aware of is that the ability to conduct meetings via video conferencing or telephone really came about due to Executive Order 7B a year ago. And there's been multiple executive orders since then, 7S, 7CC, 7JJ come to mind. All of those executive orders are currently set to expire on April 20th. There is somewhat of a tug of war going on between the General Assembly and the governor regarding the requested extension of the governor's emergency powers. The governor has introduced a bill, I think it's 6448 is his bill, that would make permanent some of the remote meeting features that we've come to embrace over the last year. And there's a lot of concern at the municipal level about that because the notion of conducting a meeting in person and also allowing members of the public to participate remotely really creates a whole new dynamic in terms of how the meeting is managed, how meeting recordings are archived and maintained, and a lot of other operational issues that really town clerks and other folks that are responsible for making sure that our meetings are conducted in a proper way are really stressed out about. So there's likely to be some resolution. I think there's going to be hearings on Thursday about some of these issues. There's a lot of features from executive orders that you guys don't have to be concerned about, that municipal lawyers and municipal officials are very concerned about, because quite frankly, you know, the emergency's not over, and we're really worried about having the executive orders expire without legislative action in the interim, and where that leaves all of us. But at least for now, and for the next 27 days, we can do things the way we've been doing them for the last year. My expectation is that there will be some extension, even if it's for a month or so, to give the governor and the legislature more time to try to hash some of these things out. But yeah, like you said, Commissioner Caldwell, the ability to allow members of the public to listen and view your meetings, that's been addressed through the executive orders. The participation issue is a little bit of a separate issue, because there's nothing in FOIA that allows or requires public agencies to allow for public participation. The public just has to be able to view and listen to your meetings, whether it's in person or whether it's over a video conferencing portal. And then in terms of public comment, that's up to you guys to decide whether you're going to allow public comment, whether you're going to limit it to items on the agenda, whether you're going to limit it to a specific block of time, whether you're going to limit it, you know, to 2 minutes, 3 minutes per speaker. That's all. You have that purview. You have that jurisdiction. That's not something that we have an ordinance or a charter provision or a statute to point towards. You guys can decide however you want to handle that. All right.
Great. Thank you very much. It was
Okay.
very helpful.
I hope it was helpful.
Yes, it was very helpful.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Any other commissioners have any questions of our town attorney? Thank you very much, Jeffrey. We appreciate it very much.
Are you done with me?
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate
great.
it.
Thank you. Enjoy your meeting.
Have a good night.
Take care.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Well, certainly that was very informative, and hopefully an answer to all of the questions that you had.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Good, good. Let's continue on with our agenda. We'll ask for the approval of the minutes from the meeting of the Board of Fire Commission held on February 23rd, 2021.
So moved.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Second.
Is there any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? So moved. The chief's report.
Give me 1 second, please. All right, chief's report. So thank you all. I'm glad that we're able to meet in person. It's been a long time coming, and it feels like it was just yesterday, but it has been, in fact, I think an entire year since we were all together in the same room. So this is a good night for us, and I've got a pretty brief report for this month. We'll start with alarms. So year-to-date 2020, we were at 1,086 alarms. Year-to-date this year, we're at 947. 5 years ago at this time, we were at 928. So I'll cover the next couple of stats, which are going to cover since our last fire commission meeting. So since our last meeting, we had 12 incident responses to the highway, 45 incidents that just an ambulance responded to and not the fire department, which is part of the reason why you're seeing the call volume. I wouldn't say it's dropping, but there's a few calls less per month than perhaps there was at one given time. And that's because we're able to, again, triage those emergency calls, those medical calls, to determine if a fire resource is really needed to respond. And that's being done through the emergency medical dispatching and the additional dispatchers that were hired. That has nothing to do with the PSA. Those were two separate projects, two separate endeavors that just happened to come together at the same exact time. So again, that's 45 incidents that we have just an ambulance responding to. We're accountable for the call. We know there's an ambulance responding. We know when it's signing on to go to the call, and we know when it arrives on scene. So we fulfilled our obligation as a town when we receive a 911 call to ensure that there's a resource being sent.
And I'm sorry, just because people get very confused about this. That's through Nelson, not an ambulance through the fire department.
That's an ambulance being provided by Nelson Ambulance.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. 60% of our calls since our last meeting were EMS related, leaving 40% to be fire related. There were approximately 340 incidents since our last meeting, 53 of which occurred at the same time, which accounts for 15% overlapping in our calls. I've covered dollar loss in the past. So dollar loss for this past month, total value of just over $739,000, a dollar loss of $48,500. So we saved $690,000 in property. And that was in large part due to 4 different building fires that we had since our last meeting. It's actually been quite a busy few weeks. Our current budget, year to date at this time last year, we were at 67.2%. Year to date, as of right now, we're at 71.3%. Just want to cover a few things on that. Obviously, it's significantly higher. Keep in mind that we are seeking FEMA reimbursement, and that should be this fiscal year. I just don't know when. We were seeking FEMA reimbursement for some of the costs that we've had to continuously clean our buildings, all 4 stations, during the COVID pandemic that we've been experiencing, and also related to some staff that had gotten infected and subsequent coverage of shifts and overtime and things of that sort. So all of that is coming out of our budget. Again, I'm actively working with the finance office now and with FEMA to seek reimbursement, potentially in the neighborhood of $200,000 or so just for the fire department alone. That will not go back to our budget. That will go into the revenue for the town. And what I've asked for is that whatever we are reimbursed, that there's an asterisk made at the end of our budget, at the end of the fiscal year, to show how much more that we actually received back. It's important to know that the town is getting a lot of this federal funding that's out there. You can ask the Board of Finance if you're looking for the exact number, but we're receiving funding because of the anticipation is that there was expenditures taking place related to the pandemic all along. And the fire department was one of the departments that was the most significantly impacted by the pandemic, not only just in terms, I wouldn't even say in terms of exposures. There were actually other departments that had more exposures and more personnel sick than we did. It's because we have 4 stations we had to clean and maintain operations with every single day. Most departments have 1, we have 4. And it's also because we had a duty to respond and a duty to act for every one of these calls. Our operations didn't change throughout this entire pandemic.
Is the FEMA money separate from the COVID relief bill that just passed?
Completely separate, yes.
Okay, and the finance department has the information on what they'll be receiving and how that will be.
Yeah, I have an idea, but I probably shouldn't, just in case I'm a little bit off,
Yeah.
I don't want to be held to it.
Yeah.
And Chief, the request for the asterisk next to our budget line item that will be over budget, has that been approved by the Board of Finance or?
No, there's nothing to approve necessarily. It's just something that as I'm going through right now and finding what we should be getting reimbursed for through FEMA, my position is that we're getting reimbursed because it was reimbursed for direct expenditures that fire department had related to this. And so what I'm looking for is whatever we're reimbursed to have an asterisk on our budget to know that it was brought back into the income side of the town.
I guess this is probably a question more for the finance department, but I don't understand why they wouldn't somehow or another show in the fire department budget that this money came in for that specific reason. I know there are like grants that sometimes the Board of Ed has in their budgets, and it gets very confusing for people. But that money comes in to the town and gets funneled to, or maybe it goes directly to the Board of Ed finance person because they have a separate one. But it would seem like it should be.
Yeah, I mean, and that's my concern. My concern is that at the end of the fiscal year, let's say for to make up a number here that we're 109% on our budget. Well, that 9% that we're over budget is directly related to pandemic expenses for COVID. And I want to make sure that it's very clear that whatever we were over in our budget, we received back from FEMA. And I think it's important that in 2-3 years from now, when we're reflecting back on budgets, that stays and that number carries over with the budget moving forward, because there will be a time a few years from now where we're going to forget what your COVID impact has.
Yeah. And we've experienced this in the past with other issues where the fire department was over budget, monies were reimbursed, went into the general fund, but in the meantime, we still looked like we were over budget, and the accounting didn't balance out for us. So I think your point is well taken. It gives us, from the historical perspective, 3, 4, 5 years down the line, when they're looking at budgets, folks are potentially could be critical of us to say you were at 109% over budget, and here you are again, fire department, you're over budget.
That's my concern.
Absolutely a valid concern, and it's been our concern all along. So I think that's valid. I'm not certain that they will in fact put it back into our budget to be able to reduce the line item, the percentile of the line item.
Yeah.
But at least if they acknowledge it, we'll be okay.
Yeah, or if there's some sort of notation, is it the Board of Finance who decides that, or is that the Finance Department who decides?
No idea who regulates that.
Okay.
That's something that, even with some of our revenue that we generate, doesn't come in back to the fire department. We've talked about this.
Yeah.
Goes into the general fund. So we might be over budget by, X percentile, but that revenue that we generated never reflects, on the plus side. So again, I think that's an accounting issue that is between the Board of Finance and the Ed Swimkowski. But in the meantime, I think the asterisk at least gives us the acknowledgement that we
Look
weren't
deeper. Yeah. Right.
look deeper to this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I just think as someone who talked to people on the Board of Finance, and I would advocate for the fact that somehow or another it should show that money came in for the fire department specifically for those expenses. Not maybe that doesn't come in as revenue, but somewhere there it should be clear that happened, because you're covering your expense. I mean, that's the whole point of having a budget, to show that you're covering your expenses. And it looks like the expenses weren't covered, but really they were, because you took the time to go through FEMA to go get some reimbursement. So it just seems like somehow or another the budget should reflect that. So
again, I think that's an accounting issue that's out of our control. But I think that message has been clear to the Board of Finance over the years, and it will continue to be articulated. So, and again, Chief, thank you for, bringing that to our attention. At least if that acknowledgement is there with the asterisk, as you said, 2, 3, 5 years down the line, people are going to remember that this was a COVID expenditure, and the monies were reimbursed.
I mean, this is not. We typically see FEMA funding coming back for us one way or the other, but it's a night or it's a day or two of overtime. It doesn't show a big hit. It's coverage for a tornado, coverage for a tropical storm, that kind of thing, and it's not a big number that we're dealing with. This is a big number.
Sure.
This has gone on for months and months of personnel and months of cleaning. It certainly added up.
Good. All right. Thank you.
Further on the budget, I wanted to cover the fees, the fire fees that we've collected. Since our last meeting, we've collected just over $129,000, which brings us this fiscal year to just under $244,000 this fiscal year. I have on here the Fire Marshal's office, along with the agendas that were sent out to each of the commission members. I provided the February Fire Marshal report, and I ask that you keep this to yourself. I have yet to pull any properties out or any addresses out, but obviously there's some things that I'm not going to disclose at this point. It was a busy month. We're starting to see the building activity pick back up now that COVID is starting to subside, and there's some relief in sight. We're starting to see a lot of building plan reviews being dropped off, and there's going to be quite a bit of activity coming up, which is also going to continue to bring up the fire permit fees, which right now are a little low as to where we have been the last several years at this time. But for Fire Marshal, 39 inspections were conducted during the month of February. There were 10 code violations found. There were 17 corrected, so there was some carried over from the month before that we had to follow up on. There were 2 abatement orders. Again, abatement orders are direct orders from the Fire Marshal's office that take place right before a court order, before we bring the individual or the company to court. And we had 55 different plan reviews or permits. There's some significant construction taking place at 6 Divine Street as Yale continues to occupy the remainder of that building. There was an apartment complex which we discovered there were some hazardous conditions in place, and there was an illegal store which we had to address. And other than that, a few fire investigations you'll see on the report. Now, a couple of things I wanted to cover under other. We had 2 recent building fires that can be tied directly to fire prevention. So one thing that we don't talk about a lot, even in this entire area, is we don't talk about fire prevention. We often talk about the fires that we responded to. We don't give a whole lot of thought to the prevention of fires. I'm happy to report that in the last 4 to 5 weeks, there were 2 fires that took place in town. These were 2 fires within commercial buildings where there was a direct correlation to the efforts of our fire inspector in the fire marshal's office going out and doing inspections, enforcing sprinkler systems to be turned on, enforcing them to be compliant, enforcing some significant detection systems to be put in place, where 2 building fires that could have been pretty extensive in damage were kept very, very minimal. They were kept to the room of origin, or they were kept to the area of origin. And that is a big win for us from the fire marshal's office, because that's something that I can tie directly to, I can tie a paper trail directly to the inspections that led up to that and the enforcement of action that we had on those property owners to do the right thing and get those sprinkler systems and detection systems where they need to be.
You know, Chief, that's an interesting point because as you're aware, just maybe prior to you just coming on board as chief, we were significantly behind on fire inspections. We brought on board the fire inspector under a consultant basis, and certainly are we current now with our inspections at this point, Chief? Close to it?
We normally would be. We're not current at this moment because of COVID. Right. We weren't allowed into a lot of these facilities to do inspections, but we're making a pretty significant effort right now to catch up. And prior to COVID, we were current. It's just COVID put us behind.
Yeah. Job well done from the fire inspector standpoint.
I really do think it's a big win for us. One of them was a pretty significant taxpayer and a good sized employer that could have potentially been shut down for several days. The other one could have been a potential for an environmental concern as well. So definitely good. Good. And then I wanted to bring to your attention as well. We had a residential house fire over the last couple of weeks, in which I had a firefighter who experienced some superficial burns to him and also damaged some gear in the process of making entry into the fire. The room became very hot, very fast, and potentially we don't have video of it, but it looks like it may have flashed over on him. And fortunately, he was close to the door. But just that you're aware, that was a close call for us. I think it's important that the public's aware that of the 4 building fires that we had since our last meeting, one of them resulted in a pretty close call for some staff. That was an incident that occurred at 3 o'clock in the morning in the Mono East District. Engine 9 was one of those days that Engine 9 was not on duty. It was not staffed. So it was one of those 2 days that is currently not staffed. Headquarters had an 11-minute response time to that incident. And the volunteer engines, 2 of which were dispatched, were 23 and 27 minutes. So certainly that's something I wanted to make sure that we realize: the time of day, the incident, where it occurred, and the close call that we had.
Can I ask, just if Mono East had been staffed on that day, would there have been a difference in response time? Can you
Yeah, for where that incident was, the Model East engine likely would have had a response time of 5 minutes compared to 11. Training, I have referenced in your agenda, but training been involved a lot with fire pre-planning and the GIS system. So you can think to the GIS map that you can see online and different layers that you can pick when you look at a GIS map for any particular area. We have a North Haven fire layer being developed for the GIS map, and that's basically going to allow our staff that anytime they pull into an apartment complex, they can look at their map and they can know exactly what apartment number is where in the complex. Same thing for some of the commercial establishments in town that might go by a suite number or a unit number because business names change so often. Oftentimes alarm companies will use a unit number, and it's not always very well defined on the marking on the plazas where the unit numbers are. So this will all be done behind the scenes. It'll give us instant access to be able to identify where these different apartments and units are. And so our staff, we trialed it the last couple of weeks, and we had staff go out to a number of different sites. We're looking at how that's going to import it now into our system. And in the summertime, we'll be back out there doing them all. We've done some training on SCBA. We've done some additional training on hazardous materials. I have a few things for sick and injury under executive session. And that's all I have for a chief's report.
Thank you, Chief. Any comments for the chief regarding his report?
Yes, I have a question, or I want to put it to the chief. I work on recycling 3 days a week. The biggest concern that the people have that come in and know I'm a commissioner, they want to know why we're running $1.5 million piece of equipment up and down. I tell them when the emergency truck is out, we run the whatever piece of equipment is available. Their answer is put on another emergency truck.
Yeah, I know there's some concern. I've been hearing that a lot, and with our staffing model of 8 to 10 firefighters that we have, depending on a shift right now. And so if we have 8, we can staff a rescue, an engine, and the tower that you're referring to.
Yes.
The tower has 2 EMTs. The incident that the tower is responding to is appropriate for 2 EMTs. It's appropriate at the EMT level. So by sending the tower, we keep the paramedic on the rescue from having to respond, and the paramedic is able to respond to the next time I want to call, perhaps, that advanced life support is needed. If you look at the cost per miles on difference between the engine and the tower, it's not much different. And the engine's going out on calls and the truck's going out and the tower's going out on calls is a negligible difference in terms of mileage. So I can appreciate the concern. It looks big. It looks like it's really costly to send out. But in the end, it's not much difference than sending a fire engine out. And it is the appropriate use of staff. It's also important to know that the way that we're triaging the calls right now, every single fire and every single EMS incident that comes into our dispatch center, the way that we're triaging the calls, chances are that if 2 EMTs were responding to that incident and it was a level that only needed 2 EMTs, a fire that would come in would be a higher level priority, and the 2 EMTs could potentially, with a few variances, leave the medical and respond to the fire.
But Chief, if we put on another 4-wheel drive emergency truck, that would save a lot of wear and tear. The majority of the people in this town are seniors. Where the emergency truck is going 4, 5, 6 times a day. Without exaggeration, you know that. But why can't we put a crew on another emergency truck?
Yeah, so we would need additional staff.
Okay.
Yep. So right now we're going to continue to try to get to the point where we've staffed engine 9 around the clock, because we carry that dual purpose of having the paramedic and the engine. And then I think as soon as we're done with that, we can certainly look, and we'll have conversations at this meeting, I'm sure, about if we should do what you're suggesting. Absolutely.
Okay.
I think the biggest thing people need to know is it's not a issue of what apparatus is going. The decision is being made based on the staff. And what staff need to go because of the fact that there aren't. You don't have enough staff to staff another emergency vehicle. So I think that I think people don't necessarily think about that, and that's a really important point is that you have to manage not only what calls come in, but what calls might come in, and make sure that you have the staff available that you would need for a higher level medical call. So I think that's a big issue that I think most residents are not aware of.
Well, I think that, and I think you're right. The chief indicated that now with the triage system that we have, we're able to have a better understanding as to what personnel needs to be sent.
Right.
And so obviously using the example of the two EMTs, they're going to a call that doesn't require a paramedic. So they're on that apparatus responding to the appropriate call for the appropriate medical condition. Right. And you heard earlier, simultaneously, calls are coming out, and the next call that comes out is a heart attack or whatever it might be, an ALS call that requires the paramedic to be there to respond. And sending the ladder truck with the EMTs allows us to better serve the town and the residents for the emergencies that require the paramedic skill and expertise. So again, I know it's difficult for folks to understand that we're sending out a ladder truck at $1.2 million in cost, but when you look at the person who is the recipient of the services that those EMTs are providing, they're appreciative of that. So, and I think ultimately our goal will be to try and bring additional paramedics and certainly another rescue vehicle in service in order to provide the services for the seniors that you're speaking about. So I think that's the ultimate goal, but it all boils down to the budget. It all boils down to money. It all boils down to the approval of the Board of Finance, and ultimately to the residents at the town meeting. So right now we're working with the monies and the personnel and the equipment that we have in order to deliver the quality customer service in the appropriate way. And at this point, I think we're doing a marvelous job with what we have. Chief, I had one question regarding our incidents and reports. I noticed here that we have 41 dispatched and canceled en route calls. And I know that we've been working with dispatch to try and pare that down. Do you have that in front of you?
Yeah, I know. I have an idea what it is.
Yeah. So my question is, now that we have been educating our dispatchers and they've got a couple of months now under their belts, are you seeing that number come down?
So what you're looking at there is a dispatch and canceled en route. You're looking at a call summary for incidents that have taken place. And so that number actually holds more merit now than it did. So at one point in time, we could say that number was typically attributed to errors. That's no longer the case. What's happening now is, without getting into too much detail, essentially a 911 call comes in, and let's say that it's at one of these facilities that we're trying to not have to send fire resources to because it's a group home, it's a medical facility, and it has to be a certain caliber of a type of call for the fire department to even have to respond. In some cases, the fire department will start en route, knowing that we have a paramedic that we can provide, and so typically this is going to be related to the ambulance. To the rescue. And the rescue will get canceled en route because a paramedic from Nelson is signing on to respond to the call. The other thing that's happening is the truck that we're referring to is responding to an incident with an Nelson ambulance. The Nelson ambulance gets there first and says, we're good, we don't need the truck, cancel the truck. So that type of incident now at one time meant something perhaps could have been improved upon. This is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing now.
So this is actually a positive.
This is.
Because now our apparatus is available for the next call because Nelson is now
Correct.
there with the appropriate staff to take care of the call.
Yeah, so I mean, and that's what's changed.
Yeah,
Nelson
good.
Ambulance is staffing 2 ambulances in town at all different locations and different times of day. And when they're simultaneously dispatched to an incident at the same time as a ladder truck, they'll arrive on scene and they'll say, hey, we got this. We don't need anybody else. Put the ladder truck back in service.
Great explanation. Thank you.
And it's important to note as well, the ladder truck will be going on less calls as soon as engine 9 is in service 24/7.
Sure.
Because then we can restructure all the incidents that engine 9 down in Monterey is responding to. We can't do that right now. We can't run it one way 2 days and then one way 2 other days. The system doesn't allow us to do that.
And our expectation is that that's going to happen in
Next fiscal year.
next fiscal year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chief, is the ladder truck in service?
It's out for routine repairs right now.
Because every time I go by Northeast,
Yeah, it was out
there's a
last
spare
week.
piece in there.
Yeah, it's been out last week and so far part of this week. Yeah,
Yeah, those trucks require a lot of PM.
they do.
Any other questions of the chief regarding his report?
One last quick question, the transport to the hospital, do we have numbers on that?
No, I tie that all into that 12.
Okay,
Yeah, so it's some of them will be transport, some will be ALS assist.
okay.
Next items are correspondence. Has any commissioner received any correspondence? Chief?
Nothing above the routine normal correspondence. No.
Discussion of unfinished business for the fire department.
A few items on your agenda this evening. The first being the training center located behind Northeast. The structural steel has been installed. You can actually see the structure itself now. The full 5 stories as we had requested. Building supplies should be arriving by the end of the week. I'm told a large delivery took place today, and you'll see that building continuing to take shape and form. The foundation's in, the steel is in, and we're looking really good to have this completed by June.
Perfect.
I have on your agenda as well the fire department vaccinators. So it's just important to note that the North Haven Fire Department, the career firefighters have been directly involved in the vaccination for a number of people here in town with the COVID-19 vaccine. This on a Saturday, not that long ago, we had fire department vaccinators providing vaccinations to all the teachers in town, and we'll be doing that again an upcoming weekend pretty soon. So again, thanks to our career staff for stepping up and providing the vaccinations. It's been immensely helpful in terms of scheduling, getting this all done.
That's wonderful, as we all experience. It's not an easy task to make appointments to get those done.
No,
Right, Jen?
I'm still waiting.
Discussion of new business for the fire department.
New business. So I have on here a note that a motion is needed to retire the statewide entry-level test for the paramedic portion of the consortium list. So I want to just let you know what that's about. So we did the same thing about 2 years ago. Remember that this is the second time that we've been involved in the statewide Connecticut consortium list. We were one of the original departments last time to be part of it, one of the original 10. And this second list that we're on now was put together March of last year, right before COVID started to hit. And it went into effect in July of 2020. We're now, I believe it's 16 departments that are part of this consortium list. So what has happened is that list was assembled. There were a total of 538 individuals who were on that list. We are part of that consortium list because it allows us to be part of a statewide testing process where the advertising is done for us. We're targeting some population that we know we definitely want to target, and we're able to broaden our reach in terms of where we're getting our candidates from. It's quite frankly much more than we can do on our own. So 538 candidates took the exam and were ranked accordingly. The issue is that there were only 21 paramedics out of the 538. So from July until now, we've interviewed or we hired or somebody else has hired the eligible paramedics off that list, the 21. Of the 21, only 9 had CPAT, which is the physical agility. So that really left only 9 to even be hired. The others can continue to get their CPAT over the course while they're on the list, and to date, it's still only at 9. Of those, there were 2 females on that list of medics, none of which had CPAT. So we're looking to exhaust that paramedic portion of the list because we do need to hire again in August, and so we'll have to do our own hiring. And
So retiring, it just means that you don't have to go through the consortium.
this is just a formality that right now all we're doing is not going to go to the consortium list for the next hire. We're going to have to do it ourselves. And again, we've done this in the past. It's just a formality at this point.
Sure. Commissioner Mulligan, would you be kind enough to make that motion?
I make a motion to retire the statewide entry-level testing paramedic section of the consortium list effective immediately.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Second.
Is there any question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Department?
Yes, please, Chief.
I have farm to families listed there. So as part of the coronavirus food assistance program, there's a partnership that was developed amongst farms throughout the country in which they received federal funding, and in turn they had to provide packages to the public for this pandemic that we experienced. So I can pass around a flyer just so that you're aware of it. I reference it because our CERT team is providing the manpower for this, the personnel for this, as well as our fire police. This is the 3rd time that they provided this. It takes place on this one happens to be on a Friday, but it's taking place, I believe, on the weekends as well. And so our personnel that fall underneath the fire department's command will be assisting with traffic control, crowd control, and things of that sort. So it's a great program. It's been taken advantage of by a lot of people in town, which is why it's back for a 3rd time. Essentially, you pull up in your car, no ID, no nothing required. They're going to provide you with a pretty good rations worth of fresh produce and so forth. And it's first come, first serve.
That's wonderful, and certainly thanks to the CERT team. They've stepped up and have done a marvelous job for our town. So congratulations to them.
I just have one other that's not on your agenda. The problem is the agenda is put together sometimes a week out, so something happens in the meantime. The Northeast Volunteer Fire Association is doing their Easter flower sale on April 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. I'm sure it's on their Facebook page.
Always good to get your pansies there. Any questions of the chief regarding the good of the department? We're going to open this up to public comments at this point. Is there anyone in room 2 there, Chief?
So we can see room 2. I don't see anybody there for public comment.
Okay. Hearing no public comments, I'll entertain a motion to move into executive session.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Question on the motion? All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. I'd like to reconvene the Tuesday, March 23rd, 2021 North Haven Fire Commission meeting. We have a motion that needs to be made. Commissioner Zuccarelli?
I'd like to make a motion to accept Jonathan Akramola as a probationary member of Monterey's Company 2 effective immediately.
Do I hear a second to that motion?
Second.
Is there any question on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. Commissioner Carwell?
Okay, I'd like to make a motion to add to tonight's agenda a discussion of the volunteer firefighters pension.
Do I hear a second to the motion?
Second.
Is there any question on the motion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. So let's open up that line item for discussion. Commissioner Zuccarelli, did you have any thoughts about that motion? That added line item?
I will second that motion.
Okay, well, it was already seconded. It's already a line item. Okay.
Who seconded that motion?
Commissioner Capucci.
Yeah.
Commissioner Capucci, any question on that?
No, not one. No bit.
Commissioner Mulligan? Oh, Jen?
No, do you want me to make a motion?
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that in order for a volunteer firefighter to collect on their pension, that they need to move from active service to the fire police.
Do I hear it?
Second.
Okay, is there any question on,
A
okay, motion,
in order for volunteer firefighter to act on pension.
To collect a pension, they need to move from active status to fire police.
and that was seconded by Commissioner Zuccarelli. Any further question on the motion? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? So moved. Any further business coming before this commission? Hearing none, I'd like to make the announcement that the next regularly scheduled Board of Fire Commission meeting will be Tuesday, April 27, 2021 at 6 p.m. at a location to be determined. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? This meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
The preceding program is brought to you in part through a grant from the town of North Haven. Watch town meetings or other videos on demand at nhtv.com.